Vladimir Nabokov is considered one of the most innovative authors of all time, but he knew the importance of imitation because I talk to authors all the time over on my free writing school who say, I have transcended one-to-one imitation. I don't need to imitate anyone anymore. And today we are going to hear Vladimir Nabokov speak at length on why they are wrong, because unless you are better than the authors who you are imitating, then you are not beyond imitating them. And if you guys don't already know, Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Nabokov's work here on YouTube. We talk about his books, we talk about his writing philosophy, and we talk about his life. You can find more videos down in the playlist below. But enough from me. Let us now hear from Nabokov. A creative writer must study carefully the works of his rivals, including the Almighty. He must possess the inborn capacity not only of recombining, but of recreating the given world. In order to do this adequately, avoiding duplication of labor, the artist should know the given world. Imagination without knowledge leads no farther than the backyard of primitive art, the child's scrawl on the fence, and the crank's message in the marketplace. Art is never simple. And Nabokov here is dropping heat because Nabokov's axiomatic philosophy and the right conscious literary renaissance philosophy is that ideas don't necessarily matter. Anybody can come up with a good idea. The easiest part of writing a novel is coming up with an idea. I have 100 novel ideas in my head that are good enough, but actually making it work, putting the time in, making it transformational is the hard part. The average novel behind me took at least 3,000 to 5,000 hours to create, and that was deep work hours. And some of them took over 8,000 to 10,000 hours to complete. And so just getting the idea down is what happens during the first draft. If you want to tell someone a lesson, if you want to teach someone something, you should start a personal development YouTube channel or write fables or children's books or do stuff like that. But to step into the artistic world of the artist requires you to stand on the shoulders of the people before you, or why would anyone necessarily care about you? And so I love Nabokov here because he first of all says that you should be carefully studying the works of your rivals, but you should also be studying the works of the Almighty. And once again, this appears studying the transcendent experience, studying the transcendental signifiers out in the world in relationships within your own soul. And the only way that you can do that adequately is having the openness to accept that that actually exists. Because if you are living without the presence of God in your life, or spending thousands of hours in solitude out in nature, then you are for sure not studying the Almighty. You do not understand the transcendent experience except the lowly existentialist one that you are trying to live out. So Nabokov here once again speaks of talent. He must possess the inborn capacity to recreate the world. And there are certain types of people who have an eye for experience. One could say are more sensitive or have certain sensibilities that open themselves up more to the universe. But I would say that if you are a student of the transcendent, if you are someone who is engaged in a growth-oriented mindset that is cultivating awareness and love in everything that you do, then even if you aren't talented, even if you are autistic or something like that, then over time you will be able to do this because writing is a long game. I know that, for instance, in yoga, that there are certain poses, if we're talking about asana and in calisthenics and really a lot of different types of working out, that are not something that can be achieved on a monthly or yearly timeline, but rather with the daily practice over 5 or 10 years, you may be able to achieve this. And the same type of transformations are how I feel writers should be viewing themselves and their work. But what specific things are you working on right now? Because if you talk about something vague like dialogue, like I just want to improve my dialogue, then that's a really hard thing to do. Because yes, every single book that you write, you're going to be improving in almost every single field. You are going to get better. But what we are looking for is a combination of accomplishing these major 5 to 10 year goals, but also in between having these Satori quantum leaps where we suddenly become better writers almost instantly. And one of the best ways that we can do that is actually through imitation, because through imitation, you actually have a very specific goal that is pretty objective for you to be able to reach, because people love to say art isn't objective. Let's talk about art subjective. And it's like, yes, like Nabokov is saying here, there are levels to the game. When you read Lolita or Pale Fire and you compare that to Jonathan Franzen or something like that, you can tell that that Franzen is good, if not sometimes great. And then you can tell that that Nabokov is a master. And you could tell almost instantly. And 9 out of 10 people would agree with you. And so most people right now, like for instance, I over on my Substack run some writing courses where we read a book and we try to imitate the book and the writing style. So we just finished a Blood Meridian for Writers course and book club and stuff. And something that I noticed is that a lot of writers in the group were able to write and sound like Cormac McCarthy in segments that are 100 to 200 words. But some of those authors went on to write some longer segments or even some longer pieces in the spirit of McCarthy. And once that stretched over a couple hundred words, a certain hollowness started to creep into their work. It didn't feel, and it's not just like it has to feel like Cormac McCarthy, but it didn't feel alive. It didn't feel on fire. It didn't feel as crazy as McCarthy's work. And so that is the 5 to 10 year journey of imitating authors. It's what Cormac McCarthy went through when he was imitating and learning from Faulkner. It took him until he wrote Suttree or published Suttree to really get out of Faulkner's shadow and become his own author. But most people are not writing novels better than Outer Dark or Child of God, but they think that they are better than imitation. When we look at Nabokov, a lot of his earlier stories were influenced by one of his heroes, Franz Kafka. And he had to go as far as saying in some of his letters later on that these short stories were kind of Kafka imitations, but this one, which is somewhat similar, isn't. Like, this one's my own thing, and it isn't like Kafka's The Trial. And I love Nabokov because within his work, he includes a lot of these authors. Like, Nabokov was a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe. And then in Pale Fire at someone, John Shade said, I had to tear apart the fantasies of Poe, which is like Nabokov saying, like, here I am now moving past Poe. And so when you are imitating an author and when you are embarking on this 5 or 10 year journey, you aren't trying to write like them exactly, but you're trying to write with the same objective quality, with life inside. You're trying to inject authenticity, a vibe, a flow to the story that will carry a reader through. Because like I said, when it comes down to writing even a couple hundred words, we can all sound like the greatest authors of all time. And so let me lay out an objective system for you guys to follow if you are going to try and imitate someone. And this is important because once again, there is this false assumption that if you can imitate someone over the course of 100 to 300 words, then boom, you understand how they write and you can move on and do your own writing on the wall, give your own soapbox presentation. But as I hopefully just laid out, that is impossible. And so over the course of your writing career, you are most likely going to be able to imitate a handful of people because eventually you are going to streak out on your own. You are going to be independent and you're going to have all these people in your toolbox and you are going to be writing masterpieces. And a video like this is hard because some of you guys are just getting into the game in your 40s or your 50s or getting back to writing. And so some of this timeline stuff is screwed up. But let's say I want to imitate Vladimir Nabokov. Well, that is going to mean that over the course of my career, and you should understand where your writing career is going, because once again, if you say, I don't know what idea I'm going to come up with, exactly, but how are you going to be writing? What type of energy and transformative feeling are you going to bring to the table? Because when you look at Nabokov's bibliography, everything is pretty similar. Even if you have something like A Pale Fire or The Gift that's a little bit different than the others, they are all the same. When I look at the authors behind me, David Foster Wallace, Cormac McCarthy, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, Margaret Atwood, I can go on and on. They all stay within a pretty similar zone. Even if they move like Margaret Atwood did or Octavia Butler did into science fiction for a book or Cormac McCarthy, the style and the presentation in those books is very similar to the others. And when you look at directors and when you look at most artists, most of the time, they are the masters of this very large pool. But many writers, I should say, and artists in all fields are naive, especially when they are young and ignorant and on fire, and think that I'm going to dominate everything. I'm going to write a postmodernist classic. I'm going to write a Western. And once again, that's a focus on ideas rather than style. And so if I was going to say, okay, I'm going to be a Nabokovian, then I would say my writing down the line is going to be very fancy and very maximalist. Because if I'm going to put the time in, if I'm going to put the work in, if this is something that I'm going to do, then it should be one of my primary aims. And so a good exercise is to think, okay, maybe who isn't my favorite author, but who am the author, what author is writing most like my ideal self, my ideal catalog of books. And once again, if you were just doing this for fun, if you don't care and you just want to write a sci-fi, then a Western and all that, then that's okay. But this channel is about writing consciously and transforming people's lives. And most of the time, that's going to require you to stay in your lane and grow, because unless you are the outlier, unless you are the one, and I understand that more people than ever have the dark triad personality traits. Everyone thinks that they're a winner. Then you need to relax. And so think of that person or that movement, that group of people. For me, that's been like in poetry, the Spanish symbolists. Then say, okay, I need to first dedicate some time to reading their entire bibliography. And if they have a biography, then you should learn about them. You should learn everything about this person, because part of the reason they are writing the way they are writing is because of who they were as an individual. And if you have a growth-oriented mindset, then you won't get caught up in the trap of, I don't need to imitate anyone. I don't need to worship anyone. You won't get caught up in that, and you will realize that taking small tweaks and small mentalities from niche aspects of people's lives and leaving the rest out is very important if you're going to be using them as a stepping stone to your own artistic success. And so, okay, you've picked Vladimir Nabokov, let's say. You've read his bibliography, you've read his letters, you've read his biography. And now you need to master imitating him in small ways, being able to write like him for 100 to 300 sentences. And during this period, you may actually reread his bibliography again. And this is crazy, you guys. One of the biggest fetishes, I should say, of the modern Western reader, and this is why many of them don't get good, is that they don't reread books. That just how writers only care about their ideas, and that's why we have so many people writing genre fiction and so much crap. There's also a subset of readers who only care about the next dopamine hit. And so they only read new books. And I should ask some of you guys out there, how often are you rereading books? I was like this at one point. I was on Goodreads. I hit over 200 books a year for 5 or 6 years in a row. I was just spending 40 plus hours a week reading. And I wasn't doing very much rereading. But today, most of the time, I am just rereading books. I already know who I want to write like, who I want to think like, but I need to deepen my understanding of those authors. And so everyone's like, you need, as a booktuber, you need to read this. Have you read this? You would love this. But until you've read something 10 plus times, you actually don't understand it. And that may be a very crazy statement. And 5 years ago, I would have disagreed with myself. But I read The Orchard Keeper to do my Cormac McCarthy, to do my Orchard Keeper course over on my Substack so many times. And I read these passages over and over again to figure out what the hell Cormac McCarthy was saying. And now I understand that novel completely. But even after the 5th reread, I still didn't have it completely. And so during this period of imitation, of the light 100 to 300 word imitation, you should be reading some of these novels again and again. This is why I am conducting almost continuous Blood Meridian book clubs over on my Substack. That's why I'm going to reread Infinite Jest and some other books for years to come, because I'll be doing it anyway. And what's interesting is that your ego, Ian Cadnack right here, is actually different than the writing personality that I am trying to embody. Even though a lot of aspects of my personality are put into my work, my unconscious, my artistic self is different. And so you really have to find the works. And that's what's good about this period of initial exploration of reading, to figure out who you want to read. That's why it's great to read 500 different novels. But once you find that author or group of authors that you like, then to other people, it may seem very bizarre, because sometimes your personality doesn't match up with the author's personality or style that you are imitating. But sometimes that's the point. Sometimes to take your ideas, your stuff to the next level, you have to go totally outside of yourself. You have to contrast your own personality with a totally different style. Because if I sit here right now and say, hey, I want to write like the Spanish symbolist poets, and I sit and I try to compete against them and imitate them, then that's cool. And so initially, maybe I should study the Spanish symbolist poets. But if I want to get better, then I may need to study the Norwegian poetry or Dadaism or something like that to take it to the next level. And intuitively, you will know this. And so that's an important thing to remember, first of all, on this course, is that you don't always need to imitate the type of author that you want to be, but rather understand that when their work and your work mix together, if you're going to take writing in that style seriously, what's that going to turn into? What's the third body of energy that's going to be? And so, for instance, if you were going to be doing Nabokov's maximalist and kind of fancy style, and then bringing that into a first person point of view, unreliable narrator novel, kind of in the vein of Kashiwo Ishiguro, then that would be insane. That would work. And funny enough, that's what Ishiguro did in his award-winning and I would say legendary novel, Remains of the Day. And so once you've done that, once you've kind of done the 100 to 300 words, then you're going to move off into longer segments. But you don't have to write a one-to-one style match. Like if I'm imitating Nabokov, I don't have to write a short story like Nabokov, but I'm going to be taking a lot of the energy and principles from Nabokov and practicing some shorter works or some poems. And it may be a step back in quality. It may be like, why the hell am I doing this? And a lot of you guys are strapped for time. A lot of you guys are like, why would I write a bunch of imitation short stories in the energy of someone else that aren't as good as what I'm personally doing? And so that gets back to this initial idea earlier, that there are these 5 to 10 year growth plans that happen when you imitate someone. We can even call it 3 to 10 years. Because the first year of actually reading an author and immersing yourself in them in the world is you just learning how to view reality through their lens. But then taking that knowing, as Nabokov says, taking this initial world and putting it down that's an imitation. But when knowledge combines with imagination, that's when magic happens. But how you figure out that algorithm, how you crack the code and get that in a 100,000 word transformative, beautiful novel is the hard part. And so that's what takes the rest of the 2 to 9 years, is you figuring out how to integrate it. But on that journey, if you are doing this, you're going to have these awakenings. You're going to have these quantum leaps where suddenly you are going to understand and be able to write like this author or in their energy like that. There's going to be no objective merit to it. There's going to be no training. But if you are on the path, if you've read their work, if you've learned to imitate their work at a small level and then on a larger short story level, then you will have these quantum leaps in the spirit of the imitated author. And then after that, once you've done some short stories, you don't need to necessarily continue that on forever. But what you need to do is see your writing, see certain problems throughout the day, be living in the spirit and viewing reality through that author that you are imitating. And so this is why when people say, I'm already past that, I know they haven't done that. That's what these authors used to do. They didn't have TV. They would literally idolize these other authors. They would be so mad that they couldn't be an author. Today, everyone has a bailout plan. Oh, it's just the leftists. Oh, publishing houses are done. No one's smart anymore. No one reads. Everyone has a plan and an excuse built in. But the winners behind me on the shelf, they didn't have an excuse built in. They knew that they needed to live like these other people. They needed whatever help they could. And so they viewed reality through their idols, through the Almighty. They experienced these transcendent things, God outside of themselves, for years at a time, and did that multiple times before they started writing masterpieces. Because when you look at a lot of the greatest authors of all time, they were already obsessing over authors and reading when they were 6 years old. They started in childhood. So by the time they graduated high school, they probably already had imitated one person. They already had that down. I know guys like Ray Bradbury and Nabokov and many others were writing and thinking about this stuff at age 14. And so then through college, they probably knocked someone else out. And then through their 20s, maybe one or two more people. Then through their 30s, one or two more people. And so then when you get to these authors' 40s and 50s, suddenly they have the weight of 6 or 7 authors who they've imitated and can view reality through, giving them a push. And then suddenly they write masterpieces. Everyone's like, oh my God, look how innovative they were. But none of us are putting in that work for 30 years. All of us are saying, I'm the one. I don't need to be patient. I don't need to do this. And skipping all of these important steps that countless artists, directors, and others have done before us. And that's because we are desperate. That's because your job sucks. You see everyone else being successful. You want the fast route. But all of that is bullshit, in my opinion. My whole goal in life isn't to leave this library of books behind me so that people can spend time and, I could be this niche person. I would rather leave a group of transformative novels and a movement behind me that was built on the shoulders of others, and that hopefully will influence other people. Because if you go out there and you write something great, you write your best work, you say, screw you, Ian, screw all this, and you release something for fun or release something good, and some people read it and some people like it, that's cool. But unless people are going to sit and imitate you, unless they are going to do the same process I just talked about to you, then what are you really worth? Have you really inspired anyone? Isn't one of our other jobs here, other than, getting our artistic energy out and sharing our story, telling our truth? That's one. Then two is helping other people in reality. Isn't maybe the third option inspiring the next generation of artists or someone 100 years from now with what we did? And this is why podcasting and these things are so important and so crazy and so beautiful for writers in 2024. And that is why that I really don't care about any introverted writers that are trying to be like Kafka, that aren't trying to write transformative things, because we can share our stories. We can share our energy. It is easier now to imitate someone like David Foster Wallace, who was a modern person with video interviews and this stuff, than it is to imitate a Nabokov. And if one day I accomplish all my writing dreams and I'm as successful as I believe I can be, then how much information with the thousands of videos and podcasts and millions of words I've put out for free online are people going to have to be inspired by? They want to be the next generation of desert poets. And so we need to stop throwing shit on the wall and calling it art. We need to stop being insular, and we need to put ourselves out there and kick off a literary renaissance, everybody. It is Sunday. It is the Lord's Day. I'm sitting here preaching too. Let's go, everybody, and I will see you all very soon in the next video.